Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to talk about a release from a few months ago, the Mortuary Collection. Before we begin, let me know in the comments if you are looking forward to this, or what your thoughts are if you've seen it already. And make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews, because it helps me out immensely if you do that. Also, if you're new here and you like movies, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. But now, let's jump right into it. This is a horror anthology that stars Clancy Brown as an eccentric mortician who recounts to a young visitor named Sam, played by Caitlin Custer, several macabre and phantasmagorical tales that he's encountered in his distinguished career. This dropped on Shudder in October, and I'll be totally honest, normally I'm not exactly the biggest fan of these sort of movies, or anthology movies in general, mainly because you have all these different directors getting involved, they're tonally inconsistent, and usually they have vastly different degrees of quality. If anything, I'd rather an anthology show over a movie. Now, when it comes to anthology movies that are all told by the same filmmaker, however, I'll be more willing to check it out. And that's the case with this film, with all the segments written and directed by Ryan Spindell making his feature debut. It's spun partially out of one of his own short films called The Babysitter Murders, which is featured as one of the segments here, and Caitlin Custer, who is also part of the frame story, starred in that short as well as the same character. The film feels like a much more adult-oriented version of Goosebumps. I could even see some people comparing it to Tales from the Crypt. There is an emphasis on splatter humor, it'll have very cheesy special effects, it has this almost made-for-TV feel, and it'll have extremely eccentric, quirky characters. Most notably here, Clancy Brown as the Mortician, who is easily one of the best parts of this movie, with a darkly comic delivery and scene-chewing presence that had me roaring with laughter almost any time he opened his mouth. As for the stories themselves, as expected, some are better than others, but they're not as wildly inconsistent as an anthology movie where multiple filmmakers are at the helm. The first story is extremely quick and involves a woman in the 1950s who's stealing wallets at a party, only to go to the bathroom and encounter a deadly monster. It's the shortest of the bunch, it features very little dialogue, and relies more on visual gags. The monster looked very obviously fake, but it's a fun concept and it didn't overstay its welcome, so for what it is, it works. The second story takes place in the 1960s and involves a frat bro who spends a night with a girl on campus only to wake up the next morning to find a creature growing inside his stomach. Of all the segments, this is probably the one that leans into the comedic elements the most. The guy who we follow around is a jerk, and it's about 20 minutes or so of him getting his comeuppance by being forced to host this creature, and he's placed in increasingly embarrassing situations as he loses his mind over it. I normally take issue with stories based around someone who's totally unlikable, but given how it's only one part of a larger story and it's mostly played for laughs, it wasn't as big of a deal to me here. The third story focuses on a man in the 1970s who's forced to take care of his comatose wife and has to base his whole life around her. He attempts to give her an overdose of painkillers to make it look like an accident, only for an unexpected turn of events to occur. This one wasn't bad, though it's probably the most tonally inconsistent of all the stories. It tries to take itself a little bit more seriously than it should, yet it still has some of the same silly special effects and over-the-top gags as the other stories. So it's off-putting when you have one moment that's meant to feel a little somber, only to be followed by this guy freaking out over something ridiculous that he sees. The segment's still enjoyable. I didn't dislike it by any means, but the fact that it couldn't pick a tone to stick with could be very jarring. And like the second segment, it's focused on another character who's not meant to be the most likable guy around. And when you have this somewhat serious tone and it's trying to get us to feel bad for this guy at times, it didn't totally work for me. It was easily my least favorite of the bunch, though I did find it funny how once it was over, a comment's made within the movie about how it wasn't that great of a story. There was a little bit of meta humor right there. But the final segment, which is the only one with an actual name, is the aforementioned Babysitter Murder short. This was probably the most enjoyable of all the segments. It's not as comedic as some of the other segments, but it's definitely the most fun. It's shot the best of them all, and is probably the bloodiest of all the segments, so horror enthusiasts who like these sort of films will especially get a big kick out of it. What helped make this one work better than the rest is that the production value is noticeably better than how the rest of the film looked. It definitely felt more like a film meant for theaters, while everything else had almost this made-for-TV feel to it. And I'm not trying to knock made-for-TV movies here, as I know there have been some that are quite enjoyable, but the shift in quality can be slightly off-putting for some people. Still, it's a nice final segment before wrapping things up in the frame story. And speaking of, one other thing I appreciate too is that it does spend a little more time in the frame story story than we're used to seeing with other horror anthologies. There have been some anthologies that will cut back for like a minute before jumping into the next segment, but this actually spends a little bit more time with our two main characters in between each story. Even though these are meant to be a series of shorts, it's still in the end trying to tell one complete story and give us at least some characters who we can enjoy watching. And we definitely got that with the Mortician and Sam here. I'm not saying these are the most complex characters around or anything, but it was nice that we do get enough time with them, that the film does develop their personalities just a bit, so that we can look forward to each time the film cuts back to them. Overall, this was a lot of fun, and one of the better releases from Shudder in 2020. It has a very enjoyable frame story that's anchored by a hilariously scene-chilling Clancy Brown, and it has 4 stories that, while differing in quality to a degree, are all for the most part fun, filled with cheesy, over-the-top special effects. It's a film that I found to be fairly overlooked, and if you love horror movies, you won't want to miss this. The Mortuary Collection gets an 8.5 out of 10. So, let me know, did you see the Mortuary Collection, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you have a favorite story from that film, and what was one of the scariest movies or shows you've seen lately? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you next time.